All right. So yeah, we're live. Hello, welcome class. Hello there, youngsters, boys and girls, men and women, all every people from all the people places. Let me welcome you to In Class with Carr, Dr. Gray Carr, Howard University Africana Studies Department Chair. How you doing, brother?
I'm fine, Professor Hunter. How you doing this beautiful first day of Black August?
Listen, it's starting already. Faria Law, thank you for the donation. It will go to the Dr. Gray Carr Book Fund. We starting already. A couple of people already. Karen Rebel, what's up? Okay, I've been waiting all week to talk to you. Uh,
You and me both, sis.
Man, there's so much going on in the world, and I do want to kick off with this whole vice presidential and the history of it. I don't want to get into personalities and all of that other stuff, but there's a lot of talk about Joe Biden picking a black woman, Haley Spencer, and I believe he has to pick a black woman. He has to. Like there's no negotiation around it. I'm kind of sad that he waited so long because now he put himself in a corner where there's so much litigation and discussion around it. Had he just done it after he accepted the nomination, and this is my vice president, that would have been it. Now it's Susan Rice, it's Elizabeth Warren, it's Kamala Harris. It's just all of this.
Wow.
And I want to focus today a little bit on Kamala Harris because I think for a lot of folk, she's problematic for a lot of folk. And we're not going to get into all the reasons why, but I just want your expertise. She's also a Howard alum, so shout out to that. She's part of, I think she's an AKA as well. So all the people questioning her blackness.
Serious.
Well, what are your thoughts on the importance of the vice presidential pick?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think I agree with you and with the general consensus. Certainly in our community, for those of us who are engaging in the political process at a minimum level by voting, we want to see a black woman, and he almost has to. If he didn't pick a black woman, I think this time around, in terms of this presidential cycle, it might have a different impact than the previous ones. I mean, the general consensus is that a vice presidential pick really doesn't alter the points that a presidential candidate is going to receive, and so it really wouldn't change people's minds in terms of who they're going to support. But I mean, with all the stuff we're hearing in commercial, news, entertainment media about enthusiasm gaps and getting out the vote, why gamble? In other words, why risk? If you pick somebody like an Elizabeth Warren, why risk the potential that you could shave off 1 or 2 percentage points in some of these states when we know the GOP has done everything from cripple the post office to throw up all kind of voter ID requirements and that kind of thing? Why risk putting it close enough to steal? So it only makes sense. Why risk picking someone like Val Demings, for example, who certainly isn't well known nationally, as well known. She's better known now as a result of the impeachment trials, of course, but why risk having to build somebody's brand, so to speak? I mean,
let me push back a little bit on that. Hillary picked Tim Kaine. John McCain picked some woman from Wasilla, Alaska, who actually helped him tremendously, if we're being honest. Sarah Palin, even though she was a horrific, problematic pick.
Well, that's why Steve Schmidt and them need to apologize. They running behind this Lincoln Project, but never forget, Steve Schmidt and them created Donald Trump. Her name was Sarah Palin.
Come on. Somebody that had to look on her hands for answers and her arm, Clinton picked Al Gore. Barack Obama probably made the most salient pick with Joe Biden, who was never a great candidate, could never win the presidency himself until we're in this particular point in history. But I feel like Val Demings, because she's in the great state of Florida, which right now I think Floridians are going to show up and show out because they're impacted from their stupid governor and the stupid president. I think also there are 2 million more people, 1.9 million more former felons who are entering back into the voter fray. LeBron James and others are going to pay their debt, their poll tax, so that they can vote. I think Florida's up for grabs. So to have a known person in Florida may not be a bad thing, but I think this is an election that we've never seen before. And thank you, Lloyd. Shout out to you, Lloyd. I can't pronounce your last name, begins with a K. I'm going to try. Kuykendall. I think I did that. Thank you, sir. So Is it important or is it not important, Dr. Carr?
Well, no, I think this you're right. We are in, well, I don't want to say uncharted territory per se, but we certainly are in a different cycle than we've ever been before. I mean, the pandemic has changed everything. The plague has changed everything, and certainly with everything we've seen now in terms of this general strike, this move in the streets in the wake of the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so forth. This really has put us in a different paradigm. And you're right. I mean, if Demings were the pick, and they were able to use that to leverage Florida, which we know DeSantis and them are working overtime to try to steal again, and Rick Scott and all these folks, yes, that would make a lot of sense. Because if the White Nationalist Party or the GOP, if they lose Florida, then it's ball game. But so yeah, in that respect, I really don't think it matters if he picks a black woman, which black woman. So you're right. We don't need to really. I mean, there are advantages for all of them. I think Susan Rice is on the Susan Rice's appearance on a short list. To me, as someone who, like you, is old enough to remember when a 28, 29-year-old Susan Rice was working in the Bill Clinton administration. For those of you who've heard of the Rwanda genocide, look that up. Look up Susan Rice's role in what they didn't do and what they did too late. And then again, who reappears again in the Obama administration. And for those who are concerned, whether you liked or disliked or hated or whatever, Muammar Gaddafi or not, understand that the slave trade started again in Libya, and black Africans, as they would say, everybody born on the continent of Africa is African one way, but the Africans who we would say are black are now being traded out of Libya into, and also the destabilization of Libya, whether you like or didn't like Gaddafi or not, led directly to the intensification of what we know now as Boko Haram. So ask some woman or man about their child, their daughters who were sold into enslavement and raped. The United States has a deep role in that. And then if you don't know the acronym AFRICOM, the African Command. So when we see Susan Rice appear on a short list, to me, it's almost like they're getting the band back together if they pick her. In other words, the previous administrations. And I don't mean just the Obama administration. I mean the Clinton administration. I mean, in other words, the same old tired paradigm. But if Susan Rice is the pick, Biden wins. I mean, it satisfies folks.
I'm going to push back again. I don't know that Biden wins if she's the pick. And let me just, again, full engagement here. We're in class. It's live. Thank you, Vahia Slim. We're going to take questions after. We're going to talk less than we did last time.
Yes.
I can't promise that, though, Dr. Carr. I can't promise.
But I want to hear what you're thinking about Susan Rice. What you think?
Right. We're going to try to hit all of the topics. I want to talk about Whitney Young, and I want to segue into Bill Clinton's speech at John Lewis in a second. So I'm just save your questions because I don't have the bandwidth to talk to Dr. Carr, ask questions, and then watch your questions. So save them till after we've finished, and I'll open it up, and then rapid fire, and I'll try to get to every question that's put in the comment section. All right. But I'm gonna push back because I don't think, and this, I'm gonna say it because we are very transparent and open here.
Yeah, we are.
Susan Rice, and this is what white people, little y, little t people, because it's a made up construct. This is where they get it wrong. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. And just because somebody bears a complexion or has a little bit of melanin or has some understanding of Black culture does not mean that they resonate with Black people. And we're not monolithic, but we know what's not Black. And I think in many ways, Susan Rice identifies facing wise more as a white man than she does as a Black woman. So you're checking a box. This is what corporations do. They'll check a box. Oh, we have X amount of Black people in our company, but do you really? If the Black person in your company works harder to make sure Black people do not advance, or they're never looking out for the Black quote unquote agenda or Black people or Black solvency or Black health and well-being, are they really Black? And there's some Black people, and we've seen them, recently actually, who have done more damage to the furtherance of Black people in our health, in our well-being, and our wealth than any white person ever could. One would even argue when the white people took over BET is when they developed the soul. Anyway, I just dropped that. I said it. Y'all can at me at Karen Hunter on Twitter. I'm here for it.
And look up the programming if you doubt that for one split second. That's exactly right. There have been a couple of what was it called? There was one book called The $1 Billion Bet, and of course, Bet, the history of Black entertainment television. And you're absolutely right, Karen. I mean, so let me ask you: do you think, in terms of, and I'm thinking now about those who've worked for a century in the field of Black politics. I mean, we can go back to the beginning of the 20th century, and well, really, the real explosion, I would say, probably takes place in the 20s and 30s at some of the HBCUs. Ralph Bunche writing about this. Oliver Cox and so many others thinking about the idea of Black people, even as we were fighting to secure the voting rights that were allegedly extended by the 15th Amendment and then fortified for women ostensibly by the 19th Amendment. Even while we were still fighting for those, they were saying, how do we engage in what we would now call Black politics? How do we think as blocks, as units? How do we wage that kind of struggle? But what we see, and we see it by the 1930s and 40s, for example, in northern cities like Chicago. I mean, symbolically, most people who are taking African-American history or African-American politics will remember, of course, the election in Chicago when you see Oscar the Priest and Oscar Mitchell. You have the Black people in Chicago move slowly from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, and they're really following the politics of the New Deal. So when you see Roosevelt and them come in the 1930s, you see a move to elect a Democratic congressman in what is ostensibly a Black district to replace the previous congressman, the Priest, who was a Republican, because that was the party, of course, that allowed us, that we used politically to break the wedge of enslavement. Now, let's say this. The further we get from Jim Crow, it seems the more diverse our political choices are. And just like everybody else in the country, in the world for that matter, our people are deeply impacted by mass media, by these things that disrupt our attention to study. And so what we see is the choices we often make are often beauty contests, particularly in the last 50 years since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So I guess what I'm saying is that, or asking you rather, is, do you think that the idea of just checking the box would be strong enough to carry a Biden presidency and satisfy some Black people who wouldn't know much about any of the candidates except who they've seen? In other words, you don't think so?
No, and I think this has got to be the election where they pay what's due. Biden's not sitting in that seat without Jim Clyburn and all those Black folk in South Carolina.
That's true.
Losing, trailing everybody until Black people and Jim Clyburn used his mighty muscle, his political will, to make sure that Black people got in line. And then he did some politicking behind the scenes, and you saw Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, everybody lined up for that Super Tuesday. They jumped out of the race. That was all political.
Yeah.
He's not sitting in that seat without South Carolina.
Agreed.
You will no longer, and I hesitate to say this because people will say, oh, well, then we shouldn't vote. No, we don't have the luxury to not vote, as 150,000+ Americans, mostly Black, are dead right now because we have a lack of leadership. And if you didn't read that piece on Jared Kushner and how they politicized COVID-19, please do that. But we don't have the luxury right now to sit home. But Joe Biden and the people around him and all those old crusty ass white men that are advising him, and if you're not listening to Simone D. Sanders, and if she's not vocal enough, and you haven't given her real teeth in your administration and your campaign, shame on you. You better put a real Black woman on, and I mean real. I'm not playing with language right now. You better put a real, just checking a box is not good enough, because he will lose.
But Harris would check the box, though, in your mind.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's going to be
I don't know if he checks the box.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between, the conversation we're having, perhaps, and the conversation that folks who are, coming in larger numbers to our conversation here and places like that are having, maybe, and just rank and file Black folk who say, I guess I will vote because we got to get Trump out of there. And maybe Kamala Harris hits their ear differently. Now, of course, this isn't, and you all know this isn't an endorsement of anyone. Because as my friend Jared Ball would say, everybody can get it. So let's be very clear. There are class distinctions, all kind of problems going on in this conversation. But, it's interesting that you mentioned Clyburn. And, thinking about the fact that we're living in a world now where the idea of what a country is, what a nation is, what a state is continuing to deteriorate. And by that, I mean, as this country in particular becomes much more demographically diverse, there are no shared interests and values beyond the rhetoric. I mean, we can all quote and say, oh, we're living up to the ideals. We want to make America better. We want to live up to the promise. Okay, set all that aside. This politics is naked fighting over resources. And if you're not organized, you're going to take an L. So as this thing begins to deteriorate, continues to deteriorate, and again, this isn't anything new. In fact, we'll talk about it in a minute. We start talking about Whitney Young. When you see James Clyburn, Congressman Clyburn represents a certain kind of political calculus and a political position in that broad range of Black politics. And again, they're writers. I mean, for my money, there's nobody better who has written about this in more recent years than Ron Walters. Ron Walters wrote a book called Black Presidential Politics in America 30 years ago that really kind of says, if there's going to be progress, we have to begin to argue among ourselves, come up with a consensus, and then say, here it is. It was Walters, for example, who was one of the Black folks who were talking in the late 60s, early 70s about a report card, a Black checklist. Here are our issues. And if you align with these issues, we'll look at your party second. But this is how we'll vote. This is what leads in part to the Gary Convention in 1972 when they were in Gary, Indiana. The idea that they could bring people together. But in that big tent room at the time, the future mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young, is a state senator out of Michigan. He's organized. He's with organized labor. He's for Black folks, but he's building coalitions. Then you got Amiri Baraka and these guys, the Pan-Africans and the Nationalists. Like, look, we only here because we are all Black, and there's certain things we just not going to tolerate. But we must have this kind of what they call unity without uniformity. But that Black report card that Walters and others are talking about, here are our issues. But it seems that the farther we get from the 70s, the further we get from the 60s, the further we get from the Jim Crow era, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, and so forth, all the way back to Reconstruction, the further we get from that, the more splintered our thinking is. And Cedric Johnson, in fact, one of Ron Walter's students, Brother Cedric Johnson, very good political scientist, wrote a book called From Revolutionaries to Race Leaders. And what he says is, among other things, and he's not alone, there are a number of people who are really writing about this, but again, coming out of that Ron Walter school, that Black political science school, what they call Black politics, their argument is the further we get from the period when we're trying to think collectively, the more we get to the idea that if you see a Black face, we assume they're representing us. And we know that's not true. But if we're living in a moment when our politics are being driven by media, packaging, marketing, people take an individual and map onto them all those political aspirations when they never said that. I mean, Barack Obama himself, we called the man a Rorschach's test. He never said he was going to do all that stuff. He just let the campaign sign speak for him, David Plouffe and them guys, hope. And so we projected onto that everything we want. And then when we didn't get it, we were like, man, you throwing us out. No, right. That's why, for example, young people in particular, those T-shirts with Malcolm X with his finger like this, and Martin Luther King with his finger like this, and Barack Obama with his fingers like this, please retire those. Save one for the Museum of African American History and Culture, put it in a frame, but don't wear that no more. Why? Because those three got one thing in common. They're Black men. But one of them is an elected politician running for office. That's not like the other two. Understand?
So let me ask you this, because you brought up Kamala Harris, and does she check a box? For some people, she will not ever check a box.
That's true.
And for me, she checks a box. So I'm not gonna split hairs, because if you're one Black,
although for some people, she can never not check the box. You're right. For some people, she'll never check the box. For other people, there's nothing she can do that will make them say, nah, I don't believe. So you're absolutely right. Yes.
And for those people, I ask this question: have we ever had a Black vice president? I mean, we can get into,
well,
Black. I mean, we can go into Washington. We can get into that another time. But in my history, we've never had a Black, we've never had a woman, we've never had anybody that potentially, and she's been fierce in the Senate. I'd prefer to see her on the Supreme Court because Sonia Sotomayor needs some help, and she's a fierce fighter. I prefer to see her there. But she can do the job is the question on the table. And why do we expect more from her as a politician than we've gotten from any other politician? Like, she's a politician. She's not a civil rights activist. She's not even Stacey Abrams, who's been fighting for voting rights. and happened to run for office. Stacey Abrams was not a politician. Stacey Abrams was actually an activist. She's not even about Demis, who was a law enforcement person who's now a politician. Kamala Harris has always been a politician.
Sure.
So to put more on her, I think, is unfair. And ask the question, is she better than Mike Pence and Donald Trump?
That's basic.
And let's just,
well, the answer, of course, is yes, she's better. But then there are people who would argue, and here go the I don't care, or I'm not going to voters, or those who are so ideologically kind of locked in. And this isn't a critique, it's just an observation that they say, yes, you might think she's better than Pence or Trump. However, the two-party system is completely corrupt and bankrupt, and the only way we're going to make progress is not to participate at all. And they'll cherry pick quotes from people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote an essay back in the 50s, why I won't vote, this kind of thing. And they'll point to insurgent campaigns. Lucy Parsons, actually socialist, back in the 19th century, ran for president, and then she one of her bloodlines was black, so she's often claimed by black people. George Washington Woodbey actually ran as a socialist for vice president. But these are third party insurgent campaigns, and they go back to the 19th century. But to your point, there's never been a black sitting vice president. And of course, Kamala Harris is qualified. She's more qualified than Pence or Trump, any of them, and in many ways more qualified than Biden, if we're talking about lucid and locked into what's going on now. But if you think about, if we think about that, those ideological camps, and at this point, I guess I've almost resigned myself to thinking that when we say the black community, we're just talking about a label on a demographic. Because again, the farther we get away from the lash and the back of the bus, the more fractured our thinking becomes. And this is what Du Bois worried about near the end of his life. He said, once they change these laws, then you're going to have the deeper question to answer. And the deeper question is a question of race and culture. If you're not going to stay together in a society, you will continue to suffer because of the demographic you're in. But your ability to fight back is going to be compromised because you won't see yourself coming out of the same foundation. So when we look, for example, with Kamala Harris, it's interesting, right? Because both of her parents are academics. Her father, coming out of Jamaica, was one of Donald Harris, radical left economist back in the 70s and 80s on the faculty of Stanford University. Engaging in this deep kind of socialist critique of the state. And his daughter is now about as establishment as you could get. So you can't even predict from generation to generation how electoral politics will go. But I'd say this finally on Kamala Harris and on anybody that Biden picks. He's got to pick a black woman. Agreed. When he does that, we've got to then not relax. We got to say now we have to intensify, because it seems to me there's a reason. In other words, the Democratic Party is still the Democratic Party. Clearly, Stacey Abrams, somewhere between the primaries before the plague and today, got kneecapped. Clearly there's some calculus involved, because in March, Stacey Abrams is on the list, and in August, Susan Rice on the list. Ain't nobody talking about Stacey Abrams. And I'm like, did Val Demings replace Stacey? What is the calculus? Are y'all, because the party is lining up its short list based on its values. So the insurgent campaigns, whether it be Sanders, the kind of quasi-insurgent campaigns like Elizabeth Warren, when we're talking about student debt, canceling student debt, not making it easier for people to pay. There's a real difference between that, right? We start talking about universal health care. Joe Biden is talking about a public option now as if they always wanted it. And he's sitting with Barack Obama in their little commercials. Yeah, remember, we wanted the public option, but we didn't think, this ain't because y'all want the public option so bad now. It's because Sanders, it's because Warren, it's because Harris and them pushed you so that you have to do that. Our people now have to do something that perhaps we've never done. And that is focus on the issues. Focus on the issues. Because if we don't focus on the issues, we could find ourselves electing a Biden and Harris and look up, and yes, they won't be deploying federal troops in the cities. Yes, if they take the Senate and the House, there will be possibility of a public option in healthcare. Yes, there'll be some reconfiguration of federal loans so that there won't be as much student loan debt, or we'll figure out better ways to pay it. But there will still be a gap between what the people are out in the street and for fighting for, and what the politicians will give, because regardless of the color of their skin, we should have learned that with 2 terms with Barack Obama. A politician should just be a rented tool for you to advance your policy agenda. But if you don't have a policy agenda, then you're just gonna cheer. In fact, I love the way my man Scott Bolden says it. He says, we elected Obama and somehow we never left the inauguration. And in other words, then we got mad at him 8 years later. You didn't do it. Hey man, you never left the inauguration. I'm a politician. Take my face off that shirt. Except those cats out there that went out and got their Barack Obama boom by selling them 1 T-shirt at a time. Them cats didn't wait. They said, okay, thanks, Barack. Now I'm gonna sell this shirt. But the rest of y'all, take my face off that shirt. I'm a president. I'm not a race. I'm not a race leader.
Man, right.
Right. Anyway, but Bill Clinton understands that. In fact, what Bill Clinton did at John Lewis's funeral, I think, was both intentional and a reminder of, in that ideological spectrum, how I started to call them something else, how people look at Black people in this country, particularly particularly white politicians like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton did, he showed himself again. How many more times we got to see this guy show himself before we see who he is?
So Dr. Carr, break down what you saw at John Lewis's funeral as it relates to Bill Clinton and his speech. That was way too long. I actually had to turn because I'm like, is he still talking?
Everybody did.
Why does he have so much time to talk? Like, why is he still talking? Is he giving the eulogy? Why is he talking so long? I was confused.
And I think Bill Clinton, he loves Black people because he imagines Black people as his last constituency, the loyal Negroes. I can do whatever the hell I want. And so I just feel comfortable here. So comfortable I can talk smack about Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and nobody run me off the mic, which should have happened. Cut the mic at that. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things very quickly. We know this, Karen, particularly in Black communities. Funerals are about the living, and it's all politics. I don't care who it is that passed. What Al Sharpton always say, most difficult thing in the world is to preach the eulogy of an unproductive Negro. Well, everybody passed, you got to elevate them. In John Lewis's case, you ain't got to lie about your brother. I mean, the man is a hero. He's in the pantheon, so you have to do that. But of course, that funeral, who was going to speak and who wasn't going to speak was already planned. We know that. It was very interesting, for example, that nobody from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was asked to speak. If you read John Lewis's autobiography, Walking with the Wind, you see when he ran for Congress in '86, when they had the first SNCC reunion about 10 years after John Lewis was replaced as chair by Stokely Carmichael, you see that, some people aren't there, they don't come. So there's always been this thing, and I've been present. I was there for the 50th anniversary of SNCC when I, got a chance to sit with John Lewis. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. And everybody comes, but you still see the politics, and they all love each other. These people faced death together, lost comrades together. So there's never a question of their love for each other. And you also see their politics are still there. And so at that funeral, it was planned, and clearly who spoke and who didn't spoke was long prearranged. And so the eulogy, as far as I'm concerned, was given by Reverend James Lawson. Jim Lawson gave the eulogy. They could have stopped after that.
I just want to pause. His thoke sounded like he was in his 30s.
How about that?
90-something years old. It was crystal clear. Was strong. I'm like, I need to clone that man. Him and who's the other 90-year-old woman? She has a twin sister named Zenobia.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Who basically ran when she had the mask. I was like, what? She took the mask off. I was like, she's 90? How is that possible? So shout out to the jeans and the good ass jeans and all of the struggle.
Black don't crack. Black don't even bend. I'm like, good Lord.
Somebody said the black thoke don't croak, and I say thoke on purpose because that makes me laugh. So just
no question.
All right.
But no. But what's funny is
Nona Clayton, and thank you. Let me correct myself as well. Elizabeth Warren didn't drop out Super Tuesday. Let me correct myself. I appreciate the comments. Thank y'all for keeping us, and all y'all folks hitting them super stickers and thumbs up and stuff and subscribing. Appreciate y'all. Okay, go ahead, Doc. Sorry.
No, I'll say real quick. No. This is all. Look, this is the beautiful thing about this conversation. Our conversations, especially the live ones, we're we can't be together physically, but we're in a big global classroom. This is a beautiful thing. So absolutely, yeah. In fact, fact checking is what everybody should be doing. That's how a study group works. When we say something, hey man, somebody, y'all see, we like Karen said, she's there. She's the point guard. She managing everything and in the conversation. So we need people to hop on and look and check and fact check and put the dates and names. That just allows us to free up to have another conversation. Jim Lawson said, I've read most of the books, and I'm sure he was being modest. He probably didn't read every damn thing on between, and he starts that movement in the early 50s. He said, I've read everything that's been written, just about everything's been written on the movement from like 1953 to 1973, very quietly expanding the idea of the civil rights movement toward what some scholars call the long civil rights movement, which they would take back to the 20s and 30s, but taking it away from two things: the Montgomery bus boycott as the beginning and the Voting Rights Act as the ending, 1975. He took it a full decade past 65, and he did it on purpose. And he praised John Lewis, and he praised John Lewis as part of a movement. He says the books get it wrong. And I love it because a lot of people quote this book, David Halberstam, The Children. This is a very good book. I think we showed it before. This is a very good book because it talks about all of these major people, but what Jim Lawson reminded us of in his eulogy, really. And because that was really, they could have stopped there. Everybody else could have, just not. I hope Jimmy Carter is still hale and hearty, but I thought about what John Lewis said about him in his autobiography, what many people said. John Lewis worked for Jimmy Carter in the Carter administration, and then he resigned, and Carter thought he resigned to campaign for Ted Kennedy for the re-election. But Lewis said, no, I didn't do that. I just wanted to go back to Atlanta. Who knows? But I don't think Carter ever forgave John Lewis. And so it may have been a little bit of lightweight shade there. But I don't know. I mean, but at any rate, Lawson reminded us by saying, John Lewis, y'all talk about John Lewis and Martin Luther King. No, John Lewis came to nonviolence in Nashville because his teacher, Kelly Miller Smith, and Kelly Miller Smith is a legend in Nashville. Kelly Miller Smith is one of the great preachers of the 20th century, an African-American who was teaching at American Baptist College, and he was a professor. C.T. Vivian and them was students. John Lewis was a student. It was Kelly Miller Smith that sent John Lewis to James Lawson, and he talked about it, and he said, before y'all, Martin Luther King, and here's the modern day Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and here's it. No, stop. Y'all get this wrong. And then he named everybody: Marion Barry, Diane Nash, James Bevel, C.T. Vivian. He said, what y'all not going to do is lift John Lewis out this narrative and put him in your politics where he fits. Because what we were about was transforming this country. And then Lawson pivots to the real issue, the one that Bill Clinton and every elected politician, as far as I'm concerned, in the kind of establishment Democratic Party doesn't want to talk about. These were not politicians, these people. He said, we were there to transform this country. And he said, we don't need bipartisanship to honor John Lewis. We need to make the Constitution live. And then he went into her and said, whoa, yeah, Bill, George, Barack, I think y'all probably shouldn't get up after this, because anybody listening to what he's saying is saying, this is a different issue. This is a moral, this is a philosophical issue. This is a civilizational level issue that we're raising. And this ain't got nothing to do with electoral politics, except that politicians have to respond to that movement. And remember when he gets into Reagan and all this kind of thing. So I think what Lawson did was basically give the framing that we can use out of that funeral. So getting to Clinton. So again, Funerals for the Living is clearly scripted. Lawson is there arguably as the representative for all the movements, SNCC, SCLC, and he doesn't miss the opportunity to remind people that it was movements, not heroic individuals you want to cherry pick. And then when Clinton gets up, and we'll say Barack Obama, because again, and people don't like to hear it, and my students certainly like to hear it when I talk about it. I say, you know what? In fact, I tweeted this out as a potential. I said,
wait, let me just pause. If y'all aren't following Dr. Greg Carr, he's pretty awesome on the Twitters and very unfiltered at Africana Carr. And let me just pause to thank Nitra Gibson. I appreciate you. And of course, Nicole, we're getting a lot of love here and we appreciate that. This is going to the Dr. Greg Carr Book Fund. Okay. So the students get on you. What do they say to you?
No, yeah, because y'all know that's why I ain't gonna. I will buy all the books, and so we had these conversations. That's exactly right. So, no, but the thing was that when what I tweeted out was I said, look at or rather read because I'm saying don't even look at them. Read a transcript of James Lawson's eulogy and read a transcript of Barack Obama's eulogy and have students compare and contrast for objective, what are they trying to accomplish, what's their style and form. And then I thought about it and I said, you know what would be a better exercise? Read the transcripts without the names of who gave them and have your students guess who gave the speech. And I suspect that many students would think Barack Obama gave the speech James Lawson gave. Why? Because that is the image we have in our mind. Barack Obama is not an activist. Barack Obama is a politician. And so please understand, I'm not raising a critique of Barack Obama because I understand what an elected person does. Okay, so when he talks about, making sure we can vote and all these kind of things, people say, see, he dared say it in public. Yeah, okay, that's great. But James Lawson is talking to you in terms of the organized thrust that we tried to change this country with. So anyway, so there's that. Funeral for the Living. Lawson gives basically the eulogy. We set aside Barack Obama. But Bill Clinton, in his rambling, I'm with my people. Y'all done let me get a little too comfortable at the cookout. I'm black like you talk, which is what he does with his little waving and lecturing thing. Bill Clinton loved talking to black people about stuff. As it was, see, we both old enough to remember Sister Soldier and all that stuff. So Bill, we know you, brother. We know you, and we know the crime, Bill.
Yes.
Your homie, Lisa Williams. No question.
That's right. That's right.
University. Yes. So Bill, we know who you are. But then he touched something that I thought was interesting, and I was glad to see particularly young people respond to this. He said, for a couple of 2 or 3 years there, in the middle, it looked like it was going to go another way towards Stokely. But in the end, John Lewis won out. And it showed us that, even John Lewis could teach us that you can learn from a defeat. Here we go again. You're going back to that SNCC meeting when Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, the blood auntie of Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, also executive director of SNCC after James Foreman, and all their colleagues got together, had a revote that night in Tennessee once everybody was in the room, and Stokely Carmichael was installed as the chair of SNCC, defeating John Lewis. That's when John Lewis left the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in part because they were comrades, a band of trust, circle of trust, as they call themselves even to this day. But on the question of political formation, SNCC had begun to make public what eventually became public, was the internal debate over direct action versus voting rights. They reconcile that by saying we'll do both, we'll commit to both, but the split really comes over how to engage in the next wave of this liberation struggle. And Carmichael and them, they have the Atlanta Project. Y'all can read about it. I mean, Claiborne Carson, I thought I had Clay Carson's book. Oh yeah, Claiborne Carson has a good book on this called In Struggle, SNCC and the Black Awakening of the 1960s. This was the first major book to talk about it, but there are a lot of books on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There's a very good website, the SNCC Legacy Project, that talks about this. There have been individuals who've written biographies. Bakari Sellers' father actually has a very good one. Get Cleve Sellers' book, The River of No Return, because Cleveland Sellers is in the room when James Meredith and them, when they decide they're going to continue to march against fear. Cleve Sellers gets arrested with the Orangeburg Massacre. And understand that when we see Jim Clyburn, he was a student activist at South Carolina State in Orangeburg. That's where he met his wife on that campus. And it was students at South Carolina State that had a march on New Year's Day, 1960, with almost 1,000 people. Jim Lawson mentioned that by way of the minister to help lead that in his eulogy. In fact, listen to Jim Lawson and footnote every name you have a history of the civil rights movement. That is before the A&T students and the Bennett Bells get involved in the sit-down stuff in the Woolworths in North Carolina. That's before that. That's South Carolina. But my point is this. When you see Bill Clinton talks about it almost went towards Stokely way. What Bill Clinton is doing is saying, and that was no accident. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I wonder if that's one of the reasons he was chosen to speak. Because he was going to put that in there. In other words, see, you Black Power people, you Pan-Africanists, you people who want to put this struggle in America in an international context and say our commitment is to humanity anywhere in the world, and we're unafraid to raise any issue, whether it be we oppose the border of Vietnam, whether we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. All you people are wrong. And whether it was COINTELPRO, yeah, maybe they went too far in COINTELPRO, maybe they didn't. Why? Because maybe y'all needed to be surveilled. You know, maybe some of y'all need to be put in jail. H. Rap Brown, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, is still in jail, and the guy who killed the cop in Atlanta confessed. And they ain't give Al-Jamin a new trial. He's in jail in North Carolina. He was the chair of SNCC after Stokely Carmichael. Bill Clinton is telling y'all, hey, look, see, all you people who were young, Henry Louis Gates has referred to Stokely Carmichael and them, at the time Stokely Carmichael, now Kwame Ture, of course, he said they were children. You know, Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins and them, they were really trying to get something to come. But Stokely and them were children. And my thing is, Professor Gates, you're a good brother, but let's quit. I know you've read Ready for Revolution. I know you read Stokely Carmichael's book, and we can disagree on the politics, but last I checked, you know, when they snatched you out your crib in handcuffs and you was cussing out the police, that's mild compared to facing death or being in parchment prison like Stokely Carmichael. So be careful with your mouth when you put Stokely Carmichael name in your mouth and call him a child. But at any rate, the whole point is Clinton, I think, was maybe there in part to say, look, America is your home. America is your battlefield. Let's all work together through the political process. And y'all don't get too excited now and get too global in your scope, because remember, John Lewis won. But what do you
time out. And I think it's important to underscore and underline what you just said, because there's this notion that it's either or.
Right.
And it's never either or. And if you really are about this life, you have to engage with all fronts.
Come on, Karen.
A global gaze, there has to be a domestic gaze. We don't have the luxury to just do one thing. And if they're telling us that's what we're not supposed to do, that's exactly what we must do.
That's right.
We have to look global. If this is the plan to keep us here because they need us, if we're being honest, they need us like they needed us 400 years ago.
Oh, no,
that stock market doesn't rage without us, without our dollars.
Nope.
So we need to start investing in it. Everything that's going on globally, the fact that I can't invest in the Jamaican stock market, which is the #1 stock market in the world right now, the fact that we can't send money to Africa, vice versa to the Caribbean, but yet I can sell you money for books in America. Why don't we? So we need to start looking globally and start connecting the dots that they won't. Rwanda couldn't have happened if we were paying attention.
Right.
Damn, Clinton, if we were paying attention, what Boko Haram couldn't have happened. If we were paying attention, what's going on in Libya right now would not be happening, or the Sudan when they were having that whole crisis and that whole civil war wouldn't be happening, because there'd be a global connection and Black people drive the bus. Sorry, those people who are in this chat right now talking with us from other places throughout the diaspora, but we drive the global bus. Sure. And if we don't get our gaze more broadly, all right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm listening because you're right. And in fact, that bell was perfectly timed. That's exactly right. No, I mean, and again, I mean, because, you know, we in class, we have a conversation and people taking notes and thinking about, y'all support these Black bookstores, because you can go and get a copy of anything by Gerald Horne, certainly his work on this. But Carol Anderson wrote a book called Eyes Off the Prize, where she talks about in the 1940s and 50s. Part of the reason that you see these civil rights advances by these warriors, these women and men like Spotswood Robinson and Constance Baker Motley and Thurgood Marshall and them, Charlie Houston, part of the reason you see these court victories is because there's a global politics at play. And at the same time that you see civil rights, so-called civil rights being advanced in the United States, you see a certain suppression of another strain in the United States. That's Essie and Paul Du Bois, Paul Robeson. That's Shirley Graham and W.B. Du Bois. That's Louise Thompson Patterson, William Patterson. In other words, you've got Black people. 1951, they go, and I won't go get the book, but there's a book called We Charge Genocide. They go to the UN and say what they're doing to Black people now. I mean, we talk about Black Lives Matter. You can trace that same energy back every generation, every other generation. 1951, they go to the UN and say, no, we're not going to do this. And so what Carol Anderson and them, Gerald Horne and them would argue that there was a compromise. The Black elites are told, or really given the sign, we're going to advance some of this loosening up on segregation. But in exchange, we need you to kind of distance yourselves from these Black internationalists. And in fact, we suspect they're really communists. So, you know, so all this Red Scare stuff, you see the NAACP, Walter White, then Roy Wilkins and them, they held on this idea of communism. You know, Dr. King, you can't have these advisors around. And so, but part of that is because The threat in this country has always been that Black people will see solidarity beyond this country. And that goes back, of course, to enslavement, because we weren't from this country. So we can, this whole idea that slavery was America's original sin. Don't do that to the Native Americans. Don't do that to our blood kin. These are our people. The original sin is settler colonialism. And then they brought us into this criminal enterprise, which is why we have so much influence, because we are at the world headquarters of this mess. So yes, we flex, destabilize the whole thing. They brought us into the crime, but they never brought us in to be Americans, which means they always looked at us as having they looked at us as having no loyalty. Go back to the American Revolution. More people fought for the British. More ran away than fought for the British and the Americans. We didn't give a damn who won. The Civil War. You got Black people like Martin Delaney and them who are saying, let's just leave. Lincoln is like, I want you to leave. Go to Liberia. And some Black people are like, no, we ain't going to leave because you told us to leave. And like you said, it's both and. So why can't I stay here, build with people of goodwill, and at the same time travel over here and see my cousin? And that's what's always scared America. We're not going to do either or. But Bill Clinton, white politicians, Black politicians, politicians of all background who subscribe to American exceptionalism want you to choose. And that becomes a problem, because then you have to do one of two things. Either you don't choose, they try to punish you, or you give, or the three things, or you give the appearance of choosing and quietly try to back map and lobby for your people. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, for example.
New York.
Her mother, no question, New York. These are Jamaicans. Do you understand when you talk about pushing back against DACA, pushing back against immigration, how many Africans and folk from the Caribbean are subject to the same cudgel these white nationalists are trying? So when Yvette Clarke is speaking, she ain't just speaking from Brooklyn. She's speaking from an island that her people came from, her mama's people came from. And we have always been both and. But that's that second category. Sometimes you have to disguise a little bit, because you got to wear that little red, white, and blue flag pin while you never forgot the rice and beans and the plantains and the patties, right? So, I mean, the most Pan-African place in the world that I've ever been is Brooklyn. Do you understand? They all claiming Brooklyn, but they from all over the African world. That's a beautiful thing. You know what I'm saying? So, but the third category is you reject it. That's the Tim Scott model. Tim Scott gonna throw in with the flag. And I'm not critiquing him. I'm just describing it. Why? Because you can pick whatever politics you want. And I read Tim Scott's book that he wrote with Trey Gowdy, and I'm holding my nose.
Everything. Is there nothing? You draw the line somewhere, Dr. Carr. You
do. But that was like a 45-minute read, because it was like 8 words on every page.
Oh my God.
It was propaganda, right? You know what I'm saying? And Tim Scott, I'm looking at him like, bruh, really? You're going to throw your whole lot in? But Tim Scott is not new. You can go back to the debates in the Black abolitionists. You had some Black people who's like, look, I'm with these people. Not because I love them all the time, but because this is our best chance. So these aren't people who are enemies of the race. They legitimately believe we can't win no other kind of way. They want to win, but they don't think we can win the other way. And history shows us the only way we win is when it's both and. There is no Brown versus Board of Education without the African Liberation Movement and the United States terrified that African Americans are going to look over and see Nkrumah and them who went to school in the United States, Ezekiel and them who went to school in the United States, and say, you know what? Yeah, we would. Or Ezekiel in Nigeria and Nkrumah in Ghana are going to come over here to the UN and say, you know what? We ain't doing no business with you, Eisenhower and Kennedy, till you tell me about why y'all beating up my cousin in Birmingham. I mean, in other words, this is the fear. This is the great fear that Black people on a global level will use their global strength to improve the lives of Black people in any specific place. That's why, I mean, again, and this isn't a critique of the American descendants of slavery or the American descendants of enslaved Africans. Look, we are descendants of those who were enslaved, but those who were enslaved had ancestors who weren't enslaved, and we are blood kin with every African in the world. Don't cut off your team, because all that leaves you with is a playing field where you can't win. As Michael Jackson said, you can't win, you can't get even, and you can't get out of the game. Once you decide, you are here in this country only. And that's what Clinton did at that funeral. Clinton tried to do that. And he tried to, because what they try to do is keep John Lewis and what they want him to represent in a tiny little box. John Lewis met Malcolm X in Africa. We talked about all this, so there's no need to go through all that. But Clinton's attempt is very important for us to think about when we think about those two strains. And this is where I think we can make the connection between what happened at that funeral and the politics of somebody like Whitney Young. By the way, I am intrigued because you've been talking about Whitney Young for the last few weeks. Those of y'all don't know, we lie. You know, Karen been like, what you think about Whitney Young? What you think about that 10-point Marshall Plan? I'm like, Karen, wait. So she sent me back. I'm in the archive now. I'm pulling stuff.
I made you go to the storage room. To the storage.
Yeah, I had to go. Oh yeah, no,
I appreciate that.
I got like 3 different places. I'm like, wait a minute, because he wrote 2 books. He only lived 49 years. He wrote a book called To Be Equal. That's where the Marshall Plan is. Then he wrote a book, Beyond Racism, right before he passed away. And he drowned, unfortunately, 49 years old. Where did he drown? Lagos, Nigeria. He was in Africa for an African-American summit. I mean, he's a complex figure. But Karen, tell me before.
Okay, let me thank Seneca Mills. I appreciate you. And me, myself, and I, NOK, appreciate you. Recently, Kamala voted down the 10% reduction of the Pentagon. I'm going to leave that up there. We're going to get to that in the Q&A. But let me thank you for that. So Whitney Young's birthday was yesterday, July 1st. And I created a news outlet, which we're going to talk more about in coming weeks, that is evolving, right? So, it's sort of like you don't show your whole hand yet, but we need to have a crisis like Ida B. Wells like outlet to tell people what's going on throughout the diaspora. So as I was reading the Shayla, who's from Howard, one of our writers, Shayla Farrell, shout out to her, Howard student, just graduated. I just hired her. She's working for us now. She did the Whitney Young piece, and I'm reading this 10-point plan, and I'm like, I'm looking for it. Usually you can Google search, you can get the Black Panther 10-point plan, you get everybody's 10-point plan. I couldn't find Whitney Young. So of course I'm gonna go to the source, to the brain, to the Dr. Carr. Where's this 10-point plan? You were like, I think it's in a book. You couldn't find the book?
Nope.
So my suspicion is that Whitney Young, after reading his bio, so brilliant, that he put together a 10-point plan that we can borrow from. We keep starting from scratch as if we've talked about this institutional knowledge so many times in this space, that we don't build on the work that other people have done. And Whitney Young brought, as you say, complicated, broad experience, brilliant man, comes from educators.
Yes.
So his 10-point plan had to be fire. So I'm like, can we pull forward a couple of the pieces and start to examine it and rebuild?
Yes.
Why do we have to start the pyramid from scratch all over again? Tired of doing it.
That is, first of all, we can't. We'll never do it. Because if every generation starts from scratch, the only thing, and we've talked about this many times, this is why you as an institution builder is so important. Individuals don't beat institutions. If every generation you have thinks they're the first one to do something and looks at the previous generations like y'all didn't get it right, but can't tell you what they got right and got wrong, they just assume it, then the only thing that endures are people who think generationally, who plan institutions over generations. And so the life of Whitney Young and his 10-point plan is symbolic of several things. It's symbolic of that ideological set of differences we just talked about. It's symbolic of the value of Black institutions, ironically, because Whitney Young was an integrationist. And I don't even know that these words really mean anything. We start talking about integrationists and separatists like this. Oh, the Nation of Islam is separatist. Yeah, did they speak Arabic? Sometime, but not really, no. Or did they live in the United States? Yes. Okay, so what you mean by separatists exactly? Because we're having this conversation in English. We use the money. We don't have no place that can't be surveilled. So in terms of separatists, I'm assuming you mean kind of a gesture toward an idea. You don't really mean like a neighborhood where you got your own ambulance service, where you got your own rules, where you could give a damn about COVID-19 if it interferes with the way you move through the world. Some of you all know some of these neighborhoods in the world. And I'm saying big up to them, respect them. Go read Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey said we need to be like some of these people who have control over their daily lives. So this is I just said those things out of respect, not out of any sense of critique. But so we're really not talking about separatists. But Whitney Young was an integrationist in this respect. Whitney Young believed that Black power in this country could best be achieved by interfacing with, negotiating with, and working where possible in partnership with the existing political, particularly economic structure. Now, I think it's really worth us having real conversations, and I would encourage people to read his biography, To Be Equal, and then read his kind of last kind of book, Testament, Beyond Racism, because what he's really grappling with is the idea that in this capitalist country, economics drives everything, and so he doesn't ever really develop a real cultural analysis, but he can be forgiven for that because his life is a testament to that. What do I mean by that? As you said, his parents were educators. Whitney Young born in Kentucky. Whitney Young's father, Whitney Young Sr., and see what you did, Karen. See, this is what happens, y'all. When Karen said, you know what, maybe we talk about this in a couple of days. What you think? I started rooting around, and I just started looking around, and I actually picked up these volumes a few years ago. There's a 2-volume history of blacks in Kentucky. This is Marion Lucas. He wrote a book called History of Blacks in Kentucky, Volume 1, Volume 2, right? In Volume 2, there's a whole discussion of a place called Lincoln Institute. This is the original building, Lincoln Institute. That's where Whitney Young Sr. was the principal. They wanted to build a Tuskegee in Kentucky. Now that's interesting because, you know, and look, my mom from Alabama, I figured I'd rep Tuskegee today. You know, in Alabama, they call it Skegee. So I figured I represent Tuskegee. That's my people. But I said, you know, I'm right, because this is why I'll go in there and get a shirt that whatever's clean, I get in there. But then Karen's like, hey, we're going to talk about Whitney Young today. I said, okay, let me learn. I'm looking at his father and I'm saying, wow, Tuskegee of Kentucky. Tuskegee. So I want to put I love Tuskegee. And we actually going to make that connection to what's happening there, because y'all saw Mackenzie Scott.
Mackenzie Scott just gave $1.7 billion. That's Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, who took half his money and giving it away to black people.
But look here, Ken, let me say this while we talking about it. Because Howard, I think, got 40 million, Tuskegee got 20 million, Xavier got 20 million, Hampton got 20 million, and all the press releases that came out last Wednesday and Thursday, biggest gift in the history of the black colleges, biggest gift, we're going to use this money. And I thought about W.E.B. Du Bois, because even though she gave that much money, 1.7 billion, I was reading an article in Newsweek last week. Since March, since this global pandemic hit, there are 29 new billionaires in the United States.
Wow.
Since the pandemic hit, 12 billionaires in this country have doubled their wealth, and one has made 5 times the amount of wealth he had before the pandemic. In total, at least as the Newsweek article, which was last week, said $583 billion have gone into the pockets of billionaires since the pandemic hit. Amazon is through the roof. And as you say, she's got a percentage of Amazon stock out of the divorce. So let's be very clear. $1.7 billion, she done made that back. So let's be very clear. You know what I'm saying? That, you know, I mean, listen, which is why Du Bois.
Wait, but hold on, pause. Her husband ain't give no money. So while she might have made the money back that she gave away, this dude who made, I think, $2.6 billion in one day,
yes,
has given bupkis. So not much at all to all of those organizations and entities.
Not yet, because we haven't made him have to do it.
Yes.
Okay. This is where Whitney Young is going with his negotiation. Whitney Young ain't coming in begging. Whitney Young is saying, look, and this is in the 10 points, basically. He's saying, if you do right by black people, you're gonna make more money. It's really a very conservative approach. It's a very capitalist approach, and we can talk about the pros and cons of that. Even in a society where we kind of see the political economy of capitalism, some people would say it's reaching its exhaustion stage and it's going to collapse. So even if they did it, it wouldn't save it. But I mean, that's for another day. But Du Bois gives a talk at Knoxville College in East Tennessee. He gives this talk in 1946, The Future and Function of the Private Negro College. And this is what he says. He says, you people looking for philanthropists to donate to education, that's okay, but please understand this. He says, wealth for consumption or future use, in other words, these big money philanthropists, he said, is no more eternal than the muscle or brain which created it, and can only last forever by continuing to take from wages and giving to profit an absolutely unjustifiable share. So when you see these billionaires donate, we say that's good. Understand the reason that she can do that is because the company that's allowing her to do that, that company is paying people peanuts got them out here delivering stuff, risking their entire lives. And so every dollar is based on wage theft. And if anyone should understand that, it's the children of those who went through enslavement, because that's what allowed the whole thing to get started. It's wage theft. And so what Whitney Young is talking about is really reparations. The only thing from Du Bois I want to mention before we go on, in that same speech, he says, first, it is clear that they cannot hope for support from miscellaneous and philanthropic gifts, colleges that is, and this would be undesirable even if it were possible. Here's the money line. Education is not and should not be a private philanthropy. It is a public service, and whenever it becomes merely a gift of the rich, it is in danger. This is the point. And this is the point that Jared Ball them talk about. It's the color of money, for example. You pay taxes. There is no need for philanthropy if you exercise the political will to go out and put people in who make decisions on how to spend your tax money, to put a floor under you. Two of the great public education systems in this country, and this is before we could take full advantage of them, even though many of us did in the wake of integration. Two of the great ones, city colleges in New York and the state education system of California. And when you see from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the number of poor people and working class people, Karen teaches, Professor Hunter teaches at one of those schools. Do you understand what it means for someone to not incur debt? And Du Bois, you know what Du Bois says education is for? Teachers should have students begin to understand the world as it is and the history of the world as it has been, and then introduce them to ways to pursue the thing they want to do with the few years they have on the earth. It is not about technical skills and vocational education at first. It's about, let me ground you in the world as it is and the world as it has been. And then I want to ask you, now that you have a sense of that, what you want to do with your life. I always like to ask students, I say, you know what? And I ask this like times to freshmen come to college. I say, do you remember what you wanted to be when you were like 5 or 6 years old? And then they'll say all these things. And I say, now what you want to be now? And the difference between what they wanted to be as children and now is largely shaped by how much money they think they can make. And then I ask them a final question. I say, now, if money was no object, what would you be studying here? And the majors they will be studying are so different, most of them, than the ones they study. Du Bois is like, you see what happens when you don't fund education? You have people now who view their life as the pursuit of a life work that's going to allow them to stay indoors, have a little piece of health care, and maybe take a vacation once or twice a year. That is not living. And then you ask philanthropists who got that money by leveraging it on the back of that type of mentality. You celebrate them when they give you a dollar back, and they done made $5 since the pandemic hit, including all the money they're gonna make from vaccines and distribution and supply chain, as you said, all that stuff. So Whitney Young's father. Oh, by the way, that Lincoln Institute, that was the name of the school they wanted to build. It's crazy, Karen. When I'm telling you, when I was reading this in the history of Black Kentucky, I won't stop to read the quote. I'll just summarize it real quick. There's a school in Kentucky called Berea College. That's where Carter G. Woodson went to school. It's an integrated school. Right? Yep. In 1904, the state of Kentucky passed something called the Day Law. They said blacks and whites can't go to school. They was trying to shut down Berea. In other words, because they don't like this idea of blackness. Carr Woodson snuck through. We're going to shut this down. Y'all ain't going to do that. Now, mind you, they have Kentucky State College for Negroes. They have Simmons College in Louisville. That's a private school, Bible school. There's a guy named William J. Simmons. We can talk about him another day. Wrote a big book called Men of Mark. It's like the who's who in Black America of the 19th century. Huge book. I got it over there somewhere, but I won't stop to get it. So you had those schools. Berea, they're going to stop black people from going to Berea in 1904. So what do the trustees of Berea do? In tandem with friends like Andrew Carnegie, they say, you know what? We'll create a school for Negroes and we'll make it like a Tuskegee of Kentucky. But they didn't mean that in a complimentary way. That meant let's have a couple of college classes and then the rest of it, we're going to train them how to work in the jobs we need them to have. Now, let me be very clear. That's not the Tuskegee of today. I rep Tuskegee. My mom was born about 30 minutes from Tuskegee. In fact, but for a couple of different phone calls and who emailed first, I'd have been on the faculty of Tuskegee instead of Howard. And, you know, maybe one day I'll go down there because I love Tuskegee. So let's be very clear. Let's not critique of Tuskegee right now. What I'm saying is that at that time, They didn't think of education for us as something for anything other than how it would serve them. And I would tell you right now, whether it's 2020 or 1904, I don't think that's changed, because these gifts from philanthropists aren't about, now you go do what you want. No, those gifts are, here's where the labor market is going. Here's some things we need. And too many of our quote unquote educational leaders then turn that into, what's the job market saying? What's the best major? No, you don't even ask these young people what they want to do. You just looking at the charts. See, this is what happens when you don't have educators in charge of education. So at any rate, 1904.
Let's pause for a second.
Yes.
And I think we need to pick up Whitney Young another day, because I think that's a whole lesson, because I want to actually go down the 10-point plan.
We should do that.
Elimination of it. But what you said was really powerful, and I'm going to leave open, start putting your questions in the comments so that I can, start directing traffic for Dr. Carr with that. But what you said is how I teach. When I was 6, 7, and 8, I wrote in a little book that I wanted to be a teacher.
Wow.
So you ask your kids, which I think is such a powerful question, and everybody who's listening right now should ask themselves, what did you want to be when you were little? I always wanted to be a teacher.
Yes.
I always wanted to be a teacher. So that's why this is no problem at all on Saturday, because to be a good teacher, you have to be a good learner. To be a good teacher, you have to be voracious in your want to know things, right? You can't teach unless you know. So I've always been curious, and I always want to teach. So thank you for that. And it just reminds me of why we do what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. In fact, well, let me say this right quick about Whitney Young. I did find a copy online of a condensed version with the 10 points. I'll send it to you. You want to drop it in the link if people want to read it. So when we do get to Whitney Young, and it's great because the people in the comments be putting in the resources. I love it. I'm like, man, y'all don't be playing. But that's the second thing. The first thing I want to say is, just to everybody listening, please, what we just heard you say, what we just heard Professor Hunter say, take that to heart, particularly with these young people. This world has already changed. In the last 4 months, it's changed. The world going forward is going to look very different than the world that we had even in March. If your child has an interest, if she loves something, let's all figure out a way to help her, because you only get one life. And so, Karen, for me to hear you say that, see, I didn't want to be a teacher when I was your age. I mean, when I was 6, 7 years old, I wanted to be a musician. Then I wanted to play baseball. Then I wanted to play music. I did all that. But somewhere along the line, the thing that I thought I wanted to do early which was be a writer, got caught in that rhythm. And it's important to encounter teachers at key moments. It's important for a John Lewis to have had a Kelly Miller Smith. If you don't know the name Kelly Miller Smith, then anything you've heard about John Lewis, as James Lawson said, is wrong. It was a teacher. It wasn't Martin Luther. I heard Dr. King, and no, it was Kelly Miller Smith that sent him to Jim Lawson, that trained him in nonviolence, that led to the John Lewis we have today. Karen, when I hear that you wanted to be a teacher, I got to ask you one question, and then we can go. Why? What was it about teachers that made you want to be one at that young age?
It had to be a teacher. And I'm thinking back now, and it really became codified at age 10. It was Mrs. Johnson. She was so stylish and dynamic and powerful and mean. She was mean, boy, was she mean. And but fair and just, yeah. I mean, just you like
powerful, dynamic, and mean.
And mean, because anybody that could keep me from talking in class and clowning in class and just disrupting. I was like, I want to be like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's always somebody that inspires you, right?
Always, or knocks you off the wrong direction. And that's really when we get to Whitney Young, one of those 10 points he raises is education. And remember, Whitney Young went to Lincoln Institute because his daddy was the principal, because they eventually did build the place. Then Whitney Young goes to Kentucky State College. And then after going into World War II, when he comes out, he goes to the University of Minnesota and gets a master's in social work. And he's the dean of the School of Social Work at Atlanta University, which was the great social work school along with Howard, but really Atlanta University for years. He was the dean there. I'm just saying, we'll talk. I know we're going to talk about Whitney Young another time, but please understand, when we hear Whitney Young, in fact, when we hear most of the people that we would identify in the civil rights movement, we're looking at Black women and men who were trained at Black institutions. So in 2020, when we think about HBCUs or black elementary schools, or we say these schools are still segregated, they're 90% black. Ain't nothing wrong with that unless you're not giving them resources. Because these people came from 100% black schools. So that's important for us to know.
Let's take some questions. And also, I actually got to interview Kimberly Bryant, who is the founder of Black Girls Code.
Yes.
She started 10 years ago. Mackenzie Scott gave her money. She already got the check. And what she's doing with it is making an endowment. So I said, for anybody starting a business or institution or something that you want to outlive you, endowments are important. Is why we still have Harvard, Yale, and all Princeton, all these other schools, and they live off of their interest, off of their endowment. They never touch their principal. And if we lived our lives like that, we'd have a legacy individually.
Yes,
we'd have a legacy that would never die. So I just wanted to shout her out, because unlike the HBCUs that's getting these checks, she's making sure that Black Girls Code, and coding is how we think. Coding is powerful. It really helps a lot of kids, and I wish that that we don't steer kids into things that just make them happy. That's good, feed your soul, but that also makes them of value to the community. So I just want to say that too.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. In fact, I'm glad you said that. Du Bois gave a commencement speech at Howard in 1930. The name of his speech was Education and Work. And he makes the same point you're raising. He said you ground students in a broad sense of the world, the humanities, the sense of social science, and you help them by exposing them to these various fields, help them find the thing that will allow them to contribute to society. That's exactly right. All of our children should know how to code. And maybe with that as an option and grounded in the humanities and the social sciences and the study of the world, what they end up coding, I mean, Karen, I gotta tell you, we see it every day. Our people, well, we created the stuff that we call civilization. So we always doing something new. You get Negroes some trash lids and some pickle buckets. They out there beating on the bottom. Next thing you know, somebody got a recording contract. What the hell? What could you do if you had the machine to know how to code? Well, then you Kanye, or then you Missy Elliott, or whatever. So you're absolutely right. That's what we have. That combination. That's the way we get free. So what we got? Let's see. What is?
All right, let's do this. Ray Zeal Born wants to know, how realistic is it for people of color to advance if we only make up 13% of American population? First of all, we are black people of color. If we put people of color, we make up 54% of the population.
Right. There it is. I mean, we could do that very quickly, right? I mean, you're right. In fact, I tell because now we're in this thing now where everybody's talking about diversity training.
Wait, hold on. So much is happening. Shout out to Real Soul. Are you kidding me? Real Soul, yo, Dr. Carr, I'm just gonna throw this up here real quick before you answer this. Real Soul, this person, you don't even have to ask a question. Real Soul just gave up $500.
Oh,
man, yo, I just want to pause. Like, let me just say how humbled I am. When we started this experiment, because that's what it was about 7-8 weeks ago during the height of the pandemic, or during the middle of the pandemic, and I was like, I want to talk to you like more frequently. And we just started doing this.
I'm just talking.
I didn't know what it would evolve into, but I knew it was necessary. And, for all the people that want me to talk to different people, y'all can do your stream and you interview those people. I want to talk to Dr. Carr. That's what I'm talking with on Saturday. You want to talk to somebody else, you start your YouTube channel and you talk to that person. I'm talking to Dr. Carr. This is In Class with Carr. It ain't going to be in class with nobody else on a Saturday but this man, period. So that's my choice, right?
Yeah.
And it's because I feel like the discourse that we need to have as people, the way you and I communicate, is a model for how we should. We don't agree on everything, off mic, but we have a level of respect, and we're sussing through the information together, and we're like, okay, I see that, but what about this? And this is how we got to arrive at the solutions that we need. There's no right or wrong, no liberal or moderate, and all of this labeling that we do of one another. Knock it off.
Right.
Karen's a moderate. You don't know what I am.
Right.
Because tomorrow, if I need to be a moderate, if it's going to further the agenda, I'll be a moderate. If I need to be a socialist next week, I'll be a socialist. If I need to be a communist at some point, that'll happen too, because we're nimble. We are citizens of the globe. And if we want to actually win, whatever winning looks like, because I think the question is, how do we advance? We advance by leaning into who we are naturally. We're the innovators and creators of all things. So if we start there, and that the only reason why there are these obstacles is because they know they can't compete. If we're allowed to actually start at the same place that you start, you can't win. Evolution tells you that. Thank you, Darwin, with your fake ass science. You done made, you created a monster. You can't kill. So, if we all kind of had that attitude about ourselves individually and then collectively, and not feed into the tropes of who we are. I'm gonna wear a scarf on my head, and that doesn't make me Aunt Jemima. It's because I feel like it, because I'm free. I'm a free Black woman, and I can do whatever I want with my body. So litigating for people how we're supposed to behave and act and do you at the best level that you can, and that will, by its very nature, further all of us. So I think that's my answer to that. But
oh my goodness, you know what? And by the way, we could thank Darwin, but we could also thank a dude named John Edmonstone. My friend Fatima Jackson, who is a biological anthropologist at Howard. She worked on the Human Genome Project. Fatima always tells her students about John Edmonstone, who was the Black tutor for Charles Darwin. Now, if you see these white dudes, you look hard enough, you're probably gonna find a Negro or something. Yes, John Edmonstone.
Did he do anything without us? Probably not. I said it.
It's crazy, right? So no, but in terms of us talking on Saturdays, she's right. I mean, y'all, we just started this as a conversation. And it came in the wake of me coming up, being on your show, serious. My sister Ajwa Batwa brought me up there one time. We just connected immediately. So I thank her always, because that connection. And so what we're participating in now, the Latin American educator Paulo Freire, he always said, we make the road by walking. So it's emerged. And anybody who knows me, and these conversations really no different in some ways than when we're in a physical classroom. I'm always trying to, and we're doing it here, we always do, connect our conversations to as many different other people and resources as possible. So one of the reasons I'm grateful that we have these brief conversations on Saturdays is because it allows us to connect to all these other people. Because in this society, it's often driven by celebrity, it's driven by ego. People, you can hear as people are talking who they're leaving out. That's why I laugh when I see people being interviewed about their books and stuff, and they talking, and I'm saying, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, and they never mention them. Why? Because I guess now I'm saying this is the entrepreneurial face of it. In other words, me, I'm like, nah, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Come on now.
Wait, hold on. Dorian? Dorian, who's my brother from Africa, who I believe is in China. Dorian Oyalaran. Since we started this YouTube channel back in October, those of you who don't know, I didn't really start doing YouTube until October, when SiriusXM decided they were going to put cameras in my studio. And I was like, I don't really want to do a TV show. I've done that. I was on CNN and MSNBC, had a contract with them. And I was like, I'm not trying to do TV. Radio's different. We've talked about this before. Radio is a soul thing. If you really go right, you are doing radio with a purpose. From Petey Green on, you're like, you're doing radio to change people's trajectories, right?
Yeah.
Radio allowed Rwandans to kill each other. That was radio that did that. Radio did that.
That's right.
So when he said cameras in the studio, I was like, how can I make this work for us? So this has been that journey, right? So I have a live stream that is not this, right? Which are best of the show, right? Yeah. So you can 24 hours a day, which nobody else can do, by the way. I got a team. We doing stuff out there. I can't tell you all of the things, but years ago. All right. So there's a 24-hour stream, and Dorian would be in there. He's one of my administrators. He comes in, and I gave him and other people the right to go in to weed out the trolls. So those of you who are being labeled as a troll, know that this is on purpose. Not that you're a troll on purpose, but we communicate in a certain way. If you're new and you're not used to having discourse with people that's respectful, if you just need to blurt out your opinion without any facts, if you just don't know how to be quiet and sit still and learn and respect that people know something more than you, and maybe you can learn, and you just are used to doing the shade room thing, this ain't the space for you. This is just not. So you're gonna get handled and shown the door, or you're gonna be, challenged, and either you're gonna step forward and become a human being, or you're gonna go someplace that feeds that desiring you to be divisive and to be negative and to come in and try to find mistakes. Again, both of us are very open to being corrected. If I say, please correct me. I know Dr. Carr is the same way, but what you're not going to disrespect this effort that both of us are putting forth on a Saturday? Come on now, we both got 5 jobs.
Come on.
You know what I'm saying? So Dorian just gave us $7,500. I have no idea what we're gonna do with that.
Whoa.
Right. So maybe
put it in there now.
This, and I'm gonna say this publicly, that money is going to go towards building out the hub, which is what I've been creating for the last.
There you go.
So thank you, Dorian. You didn't even know you were contributing to that, but there's more to come. And I'm gonna reach you off mic, but that just I mean.
Thank you. That's institution building. That's right. And that's the model Carter G. Woodson had. Woodson fought for grants. He fought for institutional access, but Woodson built the association. We talked about this many times. Woodson built the Association for the Study of African American History by having people, even school children. He said, y'all got a nickel? Put it on, because that means that you're now part of our association and you're part of the foundation. And that's how you do it. If everybody does a little, nobody has to do a lot. And in terms of this, the small percentage, the 13%, you've already said it. I'll say a couple things right quick on that, and then we go to this next question right quick. If it's all right with you. The idea of people of color, I'm encouraging people, and I say she didn't use that first person pronoun. One of the things that we have to think about is that every human being has a color. So when we say people of color, is there another way to say non-white? Or is there another way to describe people? Because the power of whiteness, one of its powers is in its invisibility. So if you say people of color, does that mean that there's another category of people? Yes. And who are they? They're white. Okay, so does that mean people means white? Why you got to add of color when you're talking about us? They don't have no color? Because the idea then is not that they don't have any color, but because then it comes the image, that is what it means to be a person. So when you say Black Jesus, that means Jesus is white. No, Jesus, and I love this. This is how whiteness fights to survive with that last gasp. No, Jesus didn't have a color. Okay, and then now you're absurd. Stop trying to stand between whiteness and exposing it, because once you expose whiteness, you can put it in the room. So I'm just saying all that. But in terms of 13%, if we're talking about people of African descent, it's exactly what you said. Already, the majority in this country is non-white. If you start with the little children, like the 5 or 4 year olds, already demographically, it's here. That's why they're working so hard now. I mean, whiteness is so desperate now that they're willing to subject the poor whites to a whole plague in attempt they're going to implode the post office, steal an election, anything to get one more time to finish switching these judges out. And if we can finish switching these judges out, we can carry this maybe another 30, 40 years. No, this is all designed to maintain you can call it racial capitalism. Certainly economics is at the center, but whatever you want to call it, whiteness is part of that alloy. And we don't say, well, I don't say people of color with an illusion as if we don't include white people. And finally, and of course, there's a whole rack of books. We can talk about all these, an African person who speaks Spanish, still an African person. So when I look at AOC, when I look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I don't see just a descendant of Puerto Ricans from the Bronx. I see a descendant of Africans, because some of the blood of Africa is in her veins too. And when she came for that congressman last week, I was watching.
He started it. He came for her, called her a bitch.
Well, right, I'm sorry. Right. When she did what we are supposed to do, I was looking for the rest of the people to be there with her. And I thought I saw, what's my man from Kansas City, the Reverend. He's in Congress now. I think his name is Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver. I thought I saw Emmanuel Cleaver sitting over there. But who I did see sitting behind her was Vasquez from New York, right? Yeah. Nydia Vasquez, right? And she had on the purple mask, and I love her mask game because she had the Betty Boop joint on yesterday. I'm looking at what I'm saying. Remember when Ocasio-Cortez was first elected, and they tried in the commercial entertainment media to say, Vasquez is trying to counsel her because she's young, she out there, so she needed something. But what I saw that day was an abuela sitting there behind her with this purple mask on. And if you know anything about Santeria, you know that that's the color of the wife of Ogun and the wife of Shango and the daughter of Oya. So I'm saying, is she sitting there?
It's a very recent phenomenon. And let me just correct myself. Dorian gave 7,500 NTs, which is a currency. I think that's a Chinese, whatever. So I'm still. Let me just say, I'm excited for the $5. I'm excited for the $1.99. I'm excited for the people who are just here, the 2,314 people who are here right now. I mean, I teach 30 kids a semester. You know, I don't know how you probably teach more than I do, but I don't have the capacity. It's a writing intensive class that I teach. So I have 15.
30 for writing intensive is absurd. Yeah.
So
you really doing too much.
2,000 people, not kids, because some of y'all might be older than us, but you know, this is a blessing and a humbling experience. But I just want to say this, you know, all of this notion of divide and conquer, which is old as Sun Tzu, but it goes before Sun Tzu, because I know there was probably some African general that figured out. Shaka Zulu probably definitely did that. This notion that Santeria and voodoo and Vodun and all of the ancestors, you know, they made it evil. I just had a conversation with somebody about this yesterday. All of our ancestors, that religion is not evil. They made it evil because they want us to not tap into it. You talk about Kwame Ture, who was from the Caribbean. Shirley Chisholm from the Caribbean.
Yes.
Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey. You know, some of our greatest warriors weren't from America. So the notion that Malcolm was going to the UN, which is probably one of the reasons why he had to get assassinated, was galvanizing the entire African contingent to go to the UN to set a case against America.
That's right. And his mother's from Grenada, by way of Canada.
So let's not doing that. You know, AOC rocks with Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, those Presley, those sisters rock together, and there's more than that. You may not like it, but it's a reality. We are stronger together. So I just want to say that and just put a point on it. All right.
I would love to see Ocasio-Cortez as a member of both the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. In fact, I'd love for a way for that bridge to be dissolved, and maybe they have their distinct caucus, but they come together. I know they come together, but for me, she should be in that. Just like Sonia Sotomayor is also part of our family, and so we can't think of ourselves. I mean, this is the demographic game. This is what, and again, there's a whole history to this, and we can talk about the social scientists talk about the fact that, for example, that demography gets read into social science in a way to keep us divided. I mean, we can go back, as you said, we talked about Charles Darwin, but social Darwinism, right, from the 19th century, the idea that you're going to take biological categories and ascribe social and cultural identities. So then once you start counting people, once you start counting them by racial category, once you start counting them by gender, once you start counting them by social class, you can then use those numbers to create social realities. So when we have, okay, blacks versus Latino, whoa, what's that category? Where did that category come from? Well, we made up an identity, and then we asked questions, and then we said, well, 13% of African Americans, then 13% of Latinx. Oh, what happened to all them Afro-Latinos? Oh, well, we'll come up. No, we see what you're doing. No, once you do that, then you have people who think of themselves in that little box. This country, I'm sorry, let me pause there. We're going to the next one. I'll just say this right quick in 30 seconds. There is no United States as one entity. The pandemic has exposed that. What there are states and regions and clusters and cities in those states. So don't think of yourself as a small percentage in DC, in New York, in LA or Oakland, the Bay Area. Don't think of yourself as a small percentage in Atlanta. I mean, think of this as we all live in communities. When you say United States of America, that don't mean nothing. This man in the White House done told y'all that. You sick? You go to hell. Blue states, as you said with that Kushner article, oh, y'all go to hell. Wait, it's on our people? All right, now, yeah, they don't give a damn. And stop thinking blue state, red state. Go to the New York Times during election and look at the map, because they break it down by county. And you can see the blue areas, so to speak, in the red states. Oh, Nebraska, not Omaha.
Come on.
Tulsa? Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Let's do Lloyd. And I'm sorry, because I'm trying to click on questions at the same time. I'm doing too much. I clicked myself out of the whole damn stream. Had to come back in. All right. Lloyd Kirkendall, the first duty of the oppressed is to resist oppression by any means necessary. How should we go about resistance? That's a great question.
I think the first resistance is, well, I mean, and I'm not a Muslim, so I won't pretend to get too deep into Islam. But I will say this, one of the things I find fascinating about, I think is fascinating, period, about the idea of jihad, struggle, you know, this question of conflict, is that we are often taught in this society to think about that as an external thing, individuals fighting other individuals, groups fighting other groups. But if I understand this correctly, and I'm thinking about Imam Al-Jamin, Rap Brown, who's still, his last book, The Rap is Live, talks about this. The first conflict, the first struggle we have is internal, according to Islam. In other words, we have a struggle to become better than what we are. And they would say you have spiritual source and you can go to all the different religions. But the first duty to resist oppression is to look inside oneself and say, what is the thing that is stopping me? We see this in the civil rights movement. And how do we resist? We resist by finding our humanity within ourselves and then sharing it outward. This is the genius of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it seems to me. When you see these young people in the South in the 1960s, what were they doing? They confronted their fear by joining together. And so their resistance was based in love and solidarity. It allowed them to take beatings, but it also allowed them to organize with people. And this was the genius of Fannie Lou Hamer, Vernon Dahmer. This is the genius of all those Black people they found in the South who said, wait, human, wait, this is oppression. Let's resist. That resistance is not based in what you're against. It begins with what you're for. And if you can have a what you're for, you can identify what you're against as it spreads out. That's the genius of that movement. That's why when you see a guy like Bill Clinton stand up and say, oh, it almost went another way for 2 or 3 years. We almost went towards Stokely. And then I'm saying, Bill, I feel sorry for you, man, because your little country is imploding. Your little concept of running this thing is imploding. And I don't even consider what you're saying enough of a threat to what we're doing to spend any time talking about it other than saying this is what he's saying. And then we move on because you're done over.
Also, Ghislaine Maxwell's, the documents have come out. Yes, we're going to know about Bill Clinton's Jeffrey Epstein connection as well. And all of those chickens, Malcolm said it, he got in trouble for it, but they come home to Bruce. What ain't passed, you ain't caught you. So keep living. So Lloyd, thank you for that question. And I couldn't say anything better than what Dr. Carr said, because what you're talking about is each of us, as I sit here right now, probably in defiance of all things. There's no Black woman supposed to be sitting here doing the things that I've been doing over the last 20 years, other than the will to say, no one's going to stop me. And that's an individual decision that you make every day you get up. So you're right. The first form of resistance is to find out for yourself what it is that you're going to fight through to get to whatever it is and if it's a selfish, and I think, everybody, probably wants to be rich and successful or whatever, but through what lens? And if it's through the lens of whiteness, if it's through the lens of colonization, if it's through the lens of what people see, if you're always fighting somebody else's view of you instead of defining for yourself who you are, you're going to always lose. So we can't win unless every individual watching this and beyond comes to a reckoning with themselves about who they are outside of the lens of whiteness, America, whatever country, your parents. Like, who are you? What were you put on this earth to do? What is your purpose?
That's right.
And if you don't pursue that within the justice movement and all this other stuff, we're going to lose.
That's right. That's right. And it's funny you say that because, the capitalist system is based on depriving people of the value of their labor at the end of the day. I mean, but it presumes that everyone cannot benefit from labor in a kind of equitable way. And so this isn't an economics question. It's a question of culture. It's really a question of whether or not you can conceive of a world where we can all live. And so it's very important for us to think about that in that way. And it's interesting when we think about, Karen's gonna come back in a minute. I'm gonna keep comping. There she goes. She's coming back in. So I'm saying that in regard to the fact that, there she goes. There we are. Yeah. I'm saying, and I'll say this very quickly because I haven't spent money on this Disney Plus. I mean, my thing is this capitalism thing.
Not even for Beyonce?
Yeah. The reason I'm raising that is because that's a capitalist platform. Disney's going to make all the money. We've talked about that before. But here's Beyonce, right? Beyonce has a platform because of her hard work, sacrifice, because of the political economy that takes entertainers and kind of extends this kind of branding thing. So she knows how to work it. Again, this ain't no critique. When she drops this Black is King, I'm laughing to myself because the clips I've seen and then the explanations, I saw her with this book. That's what tripped me out. This guy right here. My book said. This is I saw her in the little preview clip. She was reading this sitting down. Black Gods and Kings by Robert Farris Thompson. Those of you who have seen Black is King, y'all see that in the thing? Man, this book is so rare. Yoruba Art at UCLA. This is a book that was published in 1971. And it's interesting because what it basically is, and eventually then he then publishes a subsequent book, which I won't get up to get. It's called Flash of the Spirit is another one of his books, but then he does another catalog that African Art in Motion. That to me, when I saw that in her little commercial, I said, okay, what you saying to people who can see is I've been studying this stuff. Now we know that, right? We know she gonna make all the money, she and Jay, she gonna make all the money. We know that she's engaged in capitalism. Yes, Lion King to me is problematic, the updated Jungle Book, and yes, we like the Jungle Book, but Africa is full of animals and Europe ain't full of nothing but Shakespeare and Sir Isaac Newton, yeah, all that. But
entrenchment.
Exactly. But what Beyonce is doing now is demonstrating, among other things, that if you study and if you're committed to a life of the mind, whatever you do in your life as well, you can use a platform to open people's minds. And capitalism likes to think of itself, capitalists like to think of themselves as always in control. But the beautiful thing about knowledge is that it always overruns the systems that think they're in control. So people can say, yes, and I would agree, yes, it's a problem because Disney is going to make all the money. We need our own independent form. And that's what we're doing now. We need our own independent stuff. Yes, but there's going to be somebody who watches that and then who reads some of the commentary who's going to say, oh, she's wearing green. And she says because of Geb and Osiris. Geb is the Kemetic or the Egyptian nature. I wouldn't say God or goddess because they wouldn't call it that. The kind of force of nature that represents earth. Well, Seer or Osiris is with his wife and sister, Asar or Isis. This is a pairing that kind of one of the ones that gives birth to humanity. She says, I'm wearing green in part because of Geb and Asar or Osiris. Newt, and I'm saying, wow. Now watch this. Everybody out there who's talking about hoteps, I'm going to bust a little bubble right now. Unfortunately, I'm afraid. Guess what? If you watch Black is King, guess who's a hotep now? Bay. So guess what? If you're in the beehive, if you're in the Bayhive, you're hotep too. So the whole point is, but work it out however kind of way you want to work it out. And I'm not saying hotep good or bad because I know hotep means peace in the Kemetic language. It's a very profound concept, one of the oldest in world civilizations, and it's being used now as a label. But what Beyonce is doing, intentionally or not, is
I think it's intentional.
Well, you know what? I gotta believe it too, but I don't know her. I don't know nobody know her. I don't want to put words in her mouth. But when I seen Robert Farris,
because there's a lot of people.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
Okay, I've only seen clips. Okay,
queuing it up. I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch it at some point.
There's a lot of people that put Beyonce and Jay in this Illuminati. Yeah, we're going to go there. We're gonna go there. In this Illuminati, demonic Baphomet, and you as a student of Egyptian language and culture, and so as I'm looking at the images and all of the dances, and it's very voodoo, it's very Yoruba, it's very it's very ancient.
Yes,
they have lined that up with demonic. So educate us, Doc, on the actuality of what that is and why is it shrouded in this sort of demonic energy, and that's demon is dark. Is it?
Well, no, I would say this because we know, in fact, my old teacher Theophilo Obenga, one of the world's greatest Egyptologists, protege of Sheikh Anta Diop. Obenga used to teach us that he would organize it this way, and we can all organize knowledge however we want. But he says, he would keep it real simple. He said you got knowledge by faith, knowledge by reason, knowledge by opinion. And he says, knowledge by faith, you believe it. You can't argue with people what they believe. I mean, however they came to it, you're going to argue with them. It's just basically an exercise in you trying to sharpen your beliefs or whatever. He said, knowledge by opinion, that too is difficult to argue, because if you want to change somebody's opinion, we have to all be open to the fact that we will, okay, you can change my opinion once we have agreed upon the dialogue. What are we taught? What do we establish as our definitions? Then we can, but if we have different definitions, then it's just opinion. You ain't never gonna, it's like saying, who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Michael Jordan. Well, you never saw Oscar Robertson. Okay, so we don't have a common framework then. Basically, we just wasting air and generating ad buys for ESPN or whoever. The third one, he says, knowledge by reason. We've agreed on the standard. We apply the standard, and then we agree that whatever we come out with, that will be the thing that we agree is the thing as it is. So if we say, Vodun is evil, okay, that's knowledge by reason? Well, that's my opinion. Okay, what's it based on? Well, I remember growing up, we used to see these movies, so my grandmother told me, okay, fine. I don't know your grandmother. I don't know what movie you saw. So now we just arguing. Well, what about you? I think it's evil. Why? Because in my church, okay, have you ever been to a Vodun ritual? Have you ever read anything or talked to anybody who practices? No, I don't need to, because they told me as a child, okay, that's knowledge by faith. I can't argue with you. But what we can research, and I'm thinking about, let me give you just one quick book. There's an excellent anthology called Existence in Black. Lewis Gordon, my buddy Lewis Gordon, who is a philosopher by training. It's an anthology. There's a chapter in there by Page Henry, who was a philosopher at the time. He was at Brown University. Page Henry writes an article where he talks about the idea that when Africans were being brought here, and if people don't want to get into the academic side, it's a very good novel by one of the great writers of our time. His name is Daniel Black. He wrote a book called The Coming. It's a small novel. He's on the faculty at Clark Atlanta. He's a teacher like us, Clark Atlanta University. I love that brother. Brilliant brother. And so he kind of gives a fictional account of enslavement, the Middle Passage, and all this work. And it's very brilliant because he kind of puts in a place where people who don't necessarily want to read academic stuff, you can like be in this boat and see how this is happening. Page Henry says, once you have Africans introduced into the Western Christian system, because we know Christianity came out of Africa, you have this sense.
Can you say that again?
Oh, yeah,
you're like, you following the white man's religion. I'm like, no, first Christians were in Ethiopia. The first Christian convert was an African. Christianity, if you want to say Middle East, that's Africa. Israel was Africa 2,000 years ago. All of Christianity came out of Africa. It's not a white man's religion. Yes, slavery definitely bastardized, and they had a slave Bible, and they definitely used the religion as a weapon, as a tool to keep Black people in line. But it's not a white man religion, and it's not a European religion, and it's definitely not a slave religion. So thank you for saying.
No, that's very important. Like you said, what we now saw is Israel. There was no physical separation between there and Africa until the Suez Canal in the 19th century. And it take Jeremiah Wright start talking about that Reed Sea. He said, y'all talking about the Red Sea. That was a sea of reeds. I mean, in other words, it takes the theologians to get into the notion that the idea of parting the sea, that was a metaphor. But again, not as by faith. We ain't gonna get no argument, because John Henrik Clarke used to say, the minute you try to read the Bible as a history book, you're in trouble. He said, no, take it as a book of allegory, which is what the narratives of all really faith traditions are. The Yoruba, the Odu Ifa, I'm not a practitioner. I know a lot of people are. I know you do too. A lot of people who are practitioners, and they will tell you it is extremely complex. We talked about that one Saturday. So, but I'm saying that given that, yes, in fact, John Henrik Clarke would say all of those three Abrahamic traditions are African exports. Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all come out of Africa. So, but by the time it comes back into Africa, after it's going through Europe and then kind of conform to the cultures of Europe, the various cultures, and becomes white, it is used as a tool of domination. And Page Henry, in the book Existence in Black, in his chapter, talks about the fact that when these Africans are brought to the Western Hemisphere, you've got to try to strip them of their culture. They don't succeed completely, but you've got to try to short circuit the language, short circuit the cultures. And the people in the boats who then come together are kept together in clusters because it's efficient. So everybody couldn't talk to everybody else, but clusters of people could. And in the Caribbean, it was a greater chance that you would have clusters of Yoruba or Kikongo, even though they were from different regions of where they were from, they still had enough of a common language and culture to begin to try to build something. So what you have in the diaspora in the Western Hemisphere are these amazing polyglot, multicultural African mixes that are then hidden or pressed down under or commingled with the cultures of Europe and the cultures of oppression. But here's where it comes in terms of this good and evil piece. Well, you can't talk about Europe or religion. We can talk about regions of Africa people come from, but these are labels. J.Y.O. Peel has a good book on that talks about the fact that it's really Christian missionaries that start labeling these African spiritual practices as religions because they need a name they can label. But Africans weren't calling them religions. This is just the rituals, the cultures we do. So, but when they get here and they begin to mix everything up, what's keeping them together is resistance. This is what Danny is writing about. We got to resist them. Who are they? Whoever got a gun. And they look like somebody different than us. And so therefore, they begin to build cultures of resistance. Let's go back to the resistance question. And then here's the thing about good and evil that's really fascinating. The way Robert Farris Thompson writes about it, but more importantly, people like Wande Abimbola, so many others. I mean, half them cats in Brooklyn, by the way. I mean, all them guys, there used to be a Botanica as a bookstore over there in Brooklyn I used to go to. It's probably still there, where you get all the Yoruba literature, right? The stuff you can't find other places. You got to go to black bookstores. So this Everyone's Place in Baltimore, Sankofa, in Washington, D.C., the black bookstores. You ain't going to find that on Amazon. So at any rate, they say that in these various traditions that come out of Africa, the idea of a hell is not present. The idea of a heaven is not present in the way we think about it. The idea then, so what Paji Henry says is, this is what the Europeans introduced to these Africans. They introduced to them a concept of religion that said that there is a vengeful God and there are things you can do so that you will either be tortured forever or you will cease to exist. At which point they scare enough of these Africans, not the Africans who came over, but their children, their children's children, as they're separating them off, and they say, oh, what must I do to be saved? In other words, because they introduce a worldview that is really fundamentally oriented around punishment. If you think about it, many Christians, not everybody perhaps, but many Christians join up in Christianity because they don't want to go to hell. In other words, it's a negative worldview. This is foreign to many other African people. They're like, no, existence is existence. There's ethics. There's things you should and shouldn't do. There are punishments. But the idea that the creator is against the creation, where did y'all come up with this? And so what you see in Vodun, Santeria, Macumba, Candomblé, you see these rich mixes of African spiritual traditions that are grounding them in an optimistic worldview. These are the things what do y'all call it? So the Yoruba are like, yeah, we got Oludumare, okay, we got Shango, we got Yemaya. The Kikongo come, we ain't got none of them names, man. I come from a little village where I got the dirt, I got my ancestors over here. They start mixing that stuff up. Next thing you know, you got Papa Legba, Aruzi, you got Vodun, which is so amazing. And then it's all, here come the white dude, here come the white dude. What y'all doing? Nothing. It's Mary and Saint Joseph and Peter and all them. Okay, keep going. Nah, they gone? All right. Then and so they can't even see. They hid all that stuff under Catholicism. One of the jokes the Haitians always say, it tickles me whenever I encounter somebody from Haiti. I ask them, I say, you know what? Is it true what they say in Haiti? That Haiti is 99% Catholic and 100% Vodun? And they say, yeah. True. But what the white priest and what the black people who have been scared away will tell them, y'all stay away from that. It's evil. It's evil. Why? Because it's so effective. Because once you have your own culture, you can resist. In fact, Vodun is the foundation of the Haitian Revolution. That's what all the scholars say. And this is where I'll end with this. The idea of good and evil, no. Go back to the Egyptians. We talked about that. Heru versus his uncle, Setek. In their mindset, we all have every emotion in us. So when they tell parables of fighting between good and evil, they're talking about the internal struggle, what the Muslims might call the jihad. So when they have Eshu, or we talked about that, last week we talked about the signifying monkey and the rabbit and Bugs Bunny. These are the dilemmas of character. Odu Ifa say the most important thing you are on earth to do is to work on your character. Now the Indians overhear that and say, oh, that sounds like us. Yeah, you're working on your character. The Buddhist is like, yeah, that's right. And then you move on. And if you don't get it right, you come back as a fly or a horse or something. But you keep going to progressive enlightenment. And then here come the Europeans like, nah, if you don't do it right, you're going to heaven or hell. Everybody looking at them like, boy, y'all got a real messed up worldview. Why everybody got to go to hell? You got a God that would have would burn up the thing she created. Wait a minute, it's a he or a she? I'm sorry, you Europeans, I always get confused. It's a he. God is a man. Oh yeah, man. You know what? Y'all leave them Europeans alone. And so their only thing is no. What they believe is evil because it's effective. So no, it's not evil. And some people are gonna say, I don't care what you say. And that I would assume those are people who are taking knowledge by faith. I'm not arguing with knowledge by faith because you can't argue, you can't win.
You can't win. All right, last question. We're gonna finish up and let's see if Dr. Carr can answer this in less than 7 minutes. All right.
Yes. I can.
All right. Henry Gibbons wants to know, and this I picked this question because it keeps coming up. So we're gonna do this. Do you think we have come any closer to reparations now more than ever before? Can I take a stab at this first?
Please.
Okay.
Please.
This notion of reparations, which you and I have talked off mic, on mic, has been since Reconstruction. Reparations has been on the table.
That's right.
I feel like we aren't seeing that we are in a midst where we don't necessarily, not that we don't need, we are owed and deserve reparations, but if we do all of the things that we're talking about today, we own and create, we will have everything. Like, I just feel like everything that we need is right here, but we are so distracted and focused on the wrong things instead of focusing on the fact that we own the wealth, we own the work, we own the ingenuity.
Yes.
So yeah, y'all owe reparations, but let's line up everything else that we have in front of us and create our pyramids. And when the reparations comes, we'll be ready for that influx or whatever form it comes in. But
That's right. In fact, I wanted to pull up, when you talking about Whitney Young, in his 10-point plan, it's really a reparations plan. In fact, what Whitney Young argues is that this country, the United States of America, must make what he calls special effort. He argued for a $14.5 billion investment over 10 years. He said, but it begins, number one, with a recognition that people of African descent, black people, as he might say in his time, or the Negro, the country must recognize the need for special effort to overcome serious disabilities, because number two, what he says is, if the country engages in an honest inventory of who we are in this country and what our talents and abilities are, doing that will increase the ability of this country for everybody to reach its human potential. In other words, he's saying reparations, he wouldn't call it reparations, but although he gets close near the end of his life, just before he dies, and we talk about Whitney Young, but he says, and of course, we're setting aside the politics. I'm sure there are people who listen and saying, Whitney Young was Uncle Tom, didn't they put a hit out on him? Yeah, all that, yes, but I mean, there's that argument.
Talk about that later.
But we not say yes. See what Professor Hunter and I are doing. Like you say, old folks, you say you need to eat the meat and spit out the bones. We trying to figure out, like Dr. Hunter, Professor Hunter said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Whitney Young's notion of reparations, which I'm calling it loosely, is relying on the idea that there is a country that will recognize that doing something for these people who have been historically oppressed will elevate the entire country in the long run. So he's trying to make that argument. Now, of course, going back to Bill Clinton for 15 seconds, when Bill Clinton said they all thought it went another way with Stokely Carmichael's critique of nonviolence, he said, if you're being nonviolent with your opponent, you're assuming that your opponent has a conscience, and America has none. And therein lies the real issue, Brother Bill, and all the rest of y'all playing your sax and thinking you black, running around in the church where Dr. King was funeralized, where Stokely Carmichael was at the funeral. But let's be clear, if this country doesn't have a conscience, and some of us don't believe that it does.
I don't believe it.
No, well, if it doesn't, then reparations is going to be impossible, because contrary to what Whitney Young is trying to get them to say, it's going to deprive the people it is oppressed of any compensation. And guess what? Because of that, it's going to guarantee its implosion. In other words, Whitney Young is like, if y'all don't do this, the thing is going to collapse. But if you do it, it's going to be the place that you claim it is. The other side of that is, and I'll end where you started, Professor Hunter, my dear friend Karen, there are two components to reparations. The first component is the one we just heard Professor Hunter say, and that is the recognition that you are owed. Because that, whether you ever get it or not, is the restoration of your humanity. You are standing in your full humanity. You owe me. Anybody out there ever loan money to somebody, and then when you see them, they act like you don't owe them no money? Okay, as long as you don't say nothing, they got that power over you. The minute you say, hey, look, everything's cool, guess what? Hey, man, that $100, you know you owe me $100, right? Whether they ever pay you or not, it's off you now. The thing has been transferred. Do you understand? So instead of us thinking we're not going to get it or going to get it, make the demand, because that's where you start and say, you know, my ancestors were robbed. I am not the descendants of enslaved, and I'm going to stop calling it a plantation. It was a death camp. In other words, my people were in a death camp for 400 years, and guess what? I'm here, you owe me. We ain't going to pay you. Fine. I don't care whether you pay me or not. I'd like to get paid, but if I don't get paid, I have declared that my ancestors were human beings. I'm a human being. Their ancestors were human beings, and now we move forward. Because if you don't pay me, I don't have any expectation of you. I'm not voting for you. I'm not working with you. If I vote for you, it's to get an objective. Bill Clinton, hey, man, you're not welcome at my funeral. And the minute you said something about my brother is when we pull the microphone. It's time for you to sit down. And whoever told him to go up there and say that, which I strongly suspect was at least suspected he'd say something like that, now we looking at you funny. But that's an internal conversation, and you're not welcome in the conversation. And take your friend who was with you, and y'all can go outside. But the reparations demand is about us as humans, not about somebody, whether they ever pay us or not. Hey, man, you owe me this money, bro. And
let me tell you, they don't pay. Karma, whatever you want to call it, throughout the ancestors, and we're gonna have a discussion about religion at some point.
That's Whitney Young at the end of his life. What you just said. If you don't pay,
you gonna pay though. This bill is due. So that's why I don't want to focus on dividing and fighting and having these debates. They're gonna pay one way or the other. We must demand it, but let's not sit and wait like. You know, like petulant children for something that is, let's just keep building first with ourselves and then collectively, because they're gonna pay one way or the other. They don't have a way out. So
I should say this, my dear friend, there are many different ways of African spiritual traditions, but what you just named, one of the things I found most powerful in just reading and then listening to practitioners and then attending some rituals just to see, you know, in some of these traditions is, as you said, and this is in Vodun too. In fact, Vodun got a hot side, a cool side, Rara and Petro side, right? They say, one of the things they say is, now listen, we can give you something to put whatever you want put on that person, on them. We can do that. But please understand two things. Number one, they got people protecting them too. And number two, whatever we give you that you want to harm on somebody else, you got to pay the bill for that. That's why, as old folks say, don't be wishing stuff on people, man, because guess what? It might happen to them. But whether it happens or not, you got to pay the bill for the wish. That's so powerful.
Let's end there, because I promised myself I was going to do this within 2 hours. I'm sticking to it. So we got 1 minute. I just want to take 1 minute to thank everybody that joined us today, the 2,000 plus people. I'm sure it was more in and out. I'm so grateful that I'm able to have a conversation with Dr. Carr every Saturday. I'm grateful for his fellowship. I'm grateful for his scholarship. I'm grateful for his love and respect. I mean, because it really is a love journey for both of us. I got up this morning giddy, like I'm like a kid. I'm like, I get to talk to Carr today, you know. So thank you, and thank everybody that has donated, that is, you know, blessed us with the comments, that have just been participatory, even the trolls, because I know y'all don't know better yet, but you will. Y'all will learn. You know, this class, you're gonna learn today how we do, or else you won't be a part of this. And this is special. You're not gonna find this anyplace else. And you know, they're gonna be often imitated but never duplicated, because the heart of what this came together under is the notion that we are going to win, and we're going to get to where we need to get to, but foundationally we need to know. So this is a knowledge-based, discourse-based experience in class with Carr, and I just want to thank you again, brother, for everything.
No, thank you, sister, and thank you, Professor Hunter. Thank you, my dear sister. I'm looking over your right shoulder to Barracoon, and I see with Zora Neale Hurston, and in respect to those Africans, I love it. Those Africans who came in that last boat in 1862 to Clarinda, that's written about in there, and the brother in there, Kasula, when Kasula says, Zora Neale Hurston's like, I'm gonna take your picture. He said, hold on. He said, let me take my shoes off. Why are you taking your shoes off, man? Pictures in there. Why are you taking your shoes off? He said, because I was never able to go home. But when I take my shoes off and sit in here in this dirt, I feel like I'm at home. Mm-hmm. And so what those Africans in that book are telling that young sisters on their Hurston who Carr G. Woodson helped pay to go down there and get those stories in Alabama, down there in Mobile, is when we stand in our ground, we're home wherever we are. So thank you all for joining us in these one at home. And thank you, Professor Hunter, for creating this space, because I got my shoes off. Oh, you can't see. I got some pants on, but I got my shoes off because I'm here in the ground with you. And thank you for preparing this ground and planting these seeds, sis.
I love you. I love you. I love y'all too. We'll see y'all, I don't know when, but stay tuned.
Right.